Welcome to another episode of ASIA Sensemaker. This is part of our special session on Pakistan elections. To discuss this, we are honored to have Dr. TCA Raghavan, a distinguished scholar and diplomat who is one of the distinguished members of the Indian Foreign Service. Dr. Raghavan has held various crucial roles in his illustrious career as the High Commissioner of India to Pakistan from 2013 to 2015, Deputy High Commissioner in Pakistan from 2003 to 2007, and High Commissioner to Singapore from 2009 to 2013. And he has also served as Indian envoy to St. James Court. He served on Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran desk. Apart from his diplomatic achievements, Dr. Raghavan holds a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, awarded in 1992 for his dissertation on the economic history of India. His focus presently lies on historical research, strategic analysis, and the diplomatic and intellectual history of modern India. Noteworthy among his written works are Attendant Lords and The People Next Door, both of which offer comprehensive insights into India's relationship with Pakistan. His latest publication, Historyman, Jadunath Sarkar, G.S. Sardesai, Raghuveer Singh, and Their Quest for India's Past, underscores his commitment to unraveling and documenting India's historical narrative. From 2018 to 2023, he also served as the DG of ICWA. We extend a warm welcome to Dr. TCA Raghavan, anticipating insights drawn from his extensive knowledge and experiences about Pakistan. Without further delay, I would invite Professor Amok Dev Rai, Research Director, Asia, to moderate this enriching session.
Do I have your permission to go ahead, sir?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So, sir, I'm actually going to do something which... So I did a lot of research of your popular writings. You wrote an article in 2018 in Open magazine. The title of the article is The Bloody Biography of Change. And you begin it by saying, how do we contextualize the current election in Pakistan in terms of its history? And then you go on to make a very interesting argument about Pakistan and how it got to that particular point in 2018. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to ask you this question again, but I'll ask you to fast forward from 2018 to 2024, and how would you answer it today?
Well, thank you for inviting me. And one should never be held accountable for what one has written, because so much changes and so much of what was predicted turns out to be, in fact, quite different from what had been anticipated then. But essentially, there is a fundamental similarity. If you look at the 2018 election and the present election, what you see in Pakistan is a certain intervention by the military establishment to make sure that the election gets tilted in a particular direction. And in 2018, the intervention by the military was to ensure that Nawaz Sharif's party, the PMLN, would not come back to power, and their favored candidate and the favored party at that time was Imran Khan and his Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. In 2024, the effort very clearly will be exactly the opposite, that Imran Khan and his party do not get a chance to form the government again. And Nawaz Sharif is now the favored candidate. So in a sense, Pakistan has come full circle. And it is essentially a story of the military attempting to find a particular candidate from within the political spectrum, which it feels it would be able to work with, which is in its interest and in Pakistan's interest, and failing to do so, but then making another effort but this time trying with a party that they had themselves jettisoned and cut to size in the past.
Right.
So in that sense, the election, will have a certain fundamental question mark against it. Because, just like in 2018, Imran Khan was unable to contest. He had been barred from politics for life. His party had been, to a great extent, decimated. This time we see that instead of Nawaz Sharif, it is Imran Khan who's in the crosshairs. He's in jail. His party is under tremendous pressure. And it looks very likely. It cannot be stated for certain, but it looks likely that Nawaz Sharif and his party will form the next ruling dispensation.
Right. So when you take a look at the Pakistani politics today, what makes you think, and I think you've also spoken about it, and you've also, I'm sorry to do this to you, I found another piece of yours published in NatStat, where you say that the Pakistani elite has now found it very hard to extract geopolitical rent. So A, I would want to understand this particular thing. What do you mean by this? And second, how did the elites get up in a situation where there are no more than 3 or 4 actors, active political actors, that they can get behind at any given point of time? Because this was not the situation in 1970s, 1980s, but this is a situation that has come about in 1990s with the narrowing of the political corridor.
Well, you see, there's been a wide amount of comment on the multiple crises Pakistan has faced in the past 2 or 3 years. The term polycrisis has been applied to Pakistan quite effectively, because there was a major climatic crisis in the form of major flooding. Thereafter, there was a major economic crisis. There was an ongoing political crisis with Imran Khan facing a vote of no confidence, then being drummed out of power. And combined with all that, there are some elements of a national security crisis because of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and the increasing intensity of terrorist attacks in Pakistan over the past year. So all of this put together, people used to talk a great deal about Pakistan facing a situation of crisis from multiple fronts. Now, what was new in crisis is not new to Pakistan, because one can very credibly make a case that Pakistan has constantly faced different forms of crisis over the past half century, at least. 71, for instance, the country witnessed a traumatic event when it broke into two and Bangladesh emerged as a separate country. Through the 80s, there was numerous factors, but most of all, the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan created a new situation for Pakistan. There was a major military intervention following the judicial execution of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. In the 1990s, you had a political seesaw with any number. This is the post-Zia period. Again, very, very tense times in relations with India. And thereafter, in this century, in the first decade, again, you had very, very difficult situations that Pakistan faced. But what is unusual today is that Pakistan suddenly finds that it is no longer a major player in terms of the geopolitical interests of major powers. You see, in the 80s and 90s, the Afghanistan factor gave Pakistan a certain relevance to US calculations. In this century, again, after 9/11, because of the US intervention in Afghanistan, Pakistan played a very, very important role in the US scheme of things. That situation has changed completely, because with the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan, with the shifting of interest of the world generally first to Europe because of the war over Ukraine, and now to the Middle East because of the situation in Gaza. It finds that in terms of global geopolitics, Pakistan is no longer that relevant. It no longer appears to be that important to other countries, and especially to the United States. And this in a situation of multiple crises, and particularly in a time of serious economic crisis. I think the Pakistan elite found that they were in a very unusual kind of situation, that they had to deal with multilateral financial institutions or with major financial donors, where they could not dangle a geopolitical, kind of toffee in front of them. They had to deal with multilateral donors on their own terms. There was no political equation that was being brought to bear, and which is why they had such a difficult time in getting a stabilization process approved. And the economy, meanwhile, was tanking for a long period of time. There was virtually runaway inflation, a run on the Pakistani rupee, etc., etc. So I think this fact that global geopolitics has shifted away from South Asia has meant that Pakistan faces a somewhat unusual situation of not being able to use its geopolitical location for extracting financial assistance.
So that is an interesting point that you make, and I agree with it. But if I were to play the devil's advocate, I would argue that Pakistan in the last year has been able to create, for the first time, I think, in its history, create an open space and speak on terms with Central Asian countries. It has also become an important player in the Chinese BRI influenced global order. And with the coming sort of economic tensions and political tensions between the United States and both Pakistan and India are going to be an important geopolitical players again. Do you not see that the Pakistani elites can make use of this?
Actually, I don't think so, because I think their domestic situation, does not give them the kind of space which you mentioned exists, or which has been created. Their domestic situation is very bad. The economy, has a very, very long way to go before one can say it is stabilizing. The internal security situation again is in a very bad situation, largely because of the way Pakistan has implemented its strategic policies in Afghanistan. So I don't think the Central Asians, when they see the kind of difficulties which Pakistan has created for itself, with the Taliban coming back to power in Afghanistan, I don't think they find that Pakistan, offers them space to do more things with. I think the China issue which you mentioned is important, but I don't think Pakistan has leveraged its position to greater advantage vis-a-vis China. China is standing by Pakistan because it sees Pakistan as a valuable friend and a valuable ally, and because it is in its strategic interest to do so. But the implementation of the BRI has been less than optimal. And while it has not been, as some people say, a total washout, and no, some projects have worked reasonably well, but quite a significant number of them have come up against major roadblocks, which all foreign capital faces in Pakistan. So I would say that the situation actually is not sanguine at all. And in fact, Pakistan's domestic situation and its regional foreign policy choices has not enlarged its options. Enlarging options in your external space is what all countries try to do. So a successful foreign policy is when you have multiple options. I think Pakistan's options have shrunk over the past 2-3 years because of this deteriorating regional situation and their domestic situation. The situation with India, and I didn't mention, apart from Afghanistan, the situation with India has remained by and large status quo and not shown any kind of movement in any trajectory which would increase more options for Pakistan.
So, when you went to Pakistan for the first time in 2003, before that you had served, I think, 2 to 3 years under Jaswant Singh as the foreign minister. And from that time in diplomacy, when diplomacy was slightly slower, to now, when diplomacy happens on Twitter, Instagram, social media, do you see that the popular narrative of a particular country affects the diplomatic stance of countries when they're engaging with them?
Well, I think, domestic narratives and domestic politics has always had a major role in foreign policy. And this is especially so where relations with neighbors are concerned, because there the issues are no longer abstract and theoretical, but tied up with your own domestic history and domestic identity issues and so on. So domestic factors have always played, and not just in India, in any country, they always play a major role in foreign policy. Has that increased because of social media and because of greater public participation? To some extent, because, for instance, if you look at India today and compare it with 20 or 25 years ago, there is much more public participation and public buy-in to foreign policy issues than there used to be. So I would say, yes, it has increased to some extent, but not to an enormous extent. The domestic factor in external politics and external policy formulation was always a major presence.
The reason I'm asking this question is that the first time that you had gone to Islamabad, there was a lot of engagement that was happening with the Pakistani think tanks, Pakistani media, because you are eyes on the ground and consequently you have to deal with a lot of information that is coming there. And if you say that the Pakistani or any country's internal policy or stance has some impact on its foreign policy, or a large impact if a neighbor is concerned. If in Pakistan the people want a peaceful coexistence with India, how is it that in the last 75 or 76 years, no intelligentsia, no popular pressure has been able to rein in the armed forces?
That's a difficult question because it's always the big question where Pakistan is concerned, and there are different views. In one view, the Pakistan military is the cause of all the India-Pakistan problems, and if there were democratically elected governments, then the situation would have been quite different. I don't disagree with that view, but I don't think it's it's not a complete view. I think everyone in Pakistan, in my view, everyone in Pakistan, the military included, wants good relations with India. If you put the question in that form, there will be nobody who will disagree with you that we want good relations. And everyone will say that, with neighbors, it's very important to have good relations. But I think everyone will want a good relationship with India, but they will also want certain other things alongside. And the other things alongside is where the issue becomes complicated, because I think the Kashmir factor looms very large in the Pakistani imagination and in the Pakistani mindset where relations with India are concerned. And it would be, I think, not correct to think that the Kashmir factor is only important for the Pakistan military. And the Pakistani population is not concerned about it. I don't think so. I think the issue is important for the Pakistan military, of course, but the Pakistan military also recognizes how great is the buy-in from civil society into the Kashmir narrative. So it is a real stumbling block in relations between the two countries. And the challenge for diplomacy is that when you have insurmountable obstacles like this, how do you find your way around them? It's not as if it's impossible, but it's difficult. And that is the challenge which India-Pakistan relations have always faced. I think it is simplistic to hold the military alone as being responsible.
That is correct, and I absolutely agree with you. But the military or the armed forces of Pakistan have always been the training grounds. If you read Parvez Musharraf's biography, he waxes lyrical about how great the military trained him for life outside military. He credits his education to military, and this did a lot of other soldiers. But if you look at the constant falling of the elite's level of Pakistan, I mean, if you look at the value capturing that the Pakistani military has done, and then you try tracking it through different indexes. Just 4 or 5 days ago, the United States has placed Pakistan on the religious freedom restricted list. And Pakistan made a very strong denial about it. They strongly condemned it. But then they went a step ahead and then they said that, what about India? So when you take a look at their equations with Afghanistan, when you take a look at their equations in other parts of Pakistan, which are falling apart, what I would want to understand is the relationship with India only going bad because of Kashmir, or is it perhaps that the Pakistani army has found in Kashmir a justification to stay in power eternally at the cost of Pakistan?
I think that factor may be there, that the Pakistan military, how does it remain relevant in Pakistan? And how does it protect all the enormous space it has in Pakistan society, except by conjuring up external enemies? Now that is it's a fair point, but I don't think it provides a full explanation. I think
Right.
Kashmir has thrown up challenges, and yes, it is true that at critical moments, the Pakistan military made did things which made sure that India and Pakistan would not move forward. But I don't think it did those things because it wanted to remain relevant in Pakistan. I think it did those things because of a particular dynamic that developed in Pakistan, and because of conflicts it developed with other stakeholders. And the best way it could deal with those conflicts was by making sure that the process with India did not maintain momentum. So there was a civil military dynamic in Pakistan. But I don't think that the Pakistan military poses an insurmountable difficulty or insurmountable problem in moving ahead in improving India-Pakistan relations. I think there are numerous issues which are involved in the India-Pakistan equation, but I don't think any one factor is an insurmountable object.
Right. No, I agree. And so most of these questions are coming in from sort of my reading of Pakistan, which is not as extensive as it should have been or should be. But what the other thing that really one gets a sense in your book, page number 6, the neighbors, the story about India and Pakistan. there is a very interesting quote and a telling quote from Gopalaswamy Iyengar, where you say that you quote him, and he says that he would have never brought this matter of Kashmir, and because we've been talking about Kashmir, I wanted to get more insights from you on this, to the United Nations had he wanted a quick solution to it. Do you think that uh, the Western countries or the international institutions, every time they have been brought into this conversation with India and Pakistan, they've not been able to create a space which can open up the conversation?
I think the third countries, whenever they get involved in any foreign policy issue, they basically approach it from the prism of their own self-interest. So it is not as if they are doing anyone else a favor by intervening. They are seeing how to advance their own interests. So whenever we talk about third countries getting involved in the India-Pakistan equation, I think that is one point to remember, that perhaps in the 1950s, when there was a certain Western involvement and Western quote-unquote mediation, there were many in India at that time who believed that the major powers in the West certainly gave much more importance to their relations with Pakistan than they gave to India. And therefore, it was unwise to involve them in any India-Pakistan discussion. There's a lot of merit in that view because, given the different positions India and Pakistan had taken in the Cold War, given India's postures with regard to non-alignment and so on, there was very little trust in India about the intentions of the major Western powers, and in particular the United States, and to some extent Britain as well.
Right. So, if we actually move away from the Cold War, because Cold War is a very interesting theme, but it becomes very, very large. But if we move just slightly ahead of the Cold War, from 1990 to 2001, when the history had ended, as per Francis Fukuyama, and the United States was, we were living in a unipolar world. At that point of time, what was the need for the Western countries to have Pakistan? Soviet Union and the Soviet Malays had been taken care of. India was rising as an economic power thanks to the LPG reforms. So, but from 1990 to 2001, nobody actually asked Pakistan to get on a table and restore its internal systems. What was Pakistan needed then for, from 1990 to 2001? I would get your argument post 2001, Taliban, airstrikes, the Iraq War, but the 11 years before that.
Well, you see, 1990 to 2001 was internally a pretty stressed out time for Pakistan. This was broadly the post-Zia decade.
Yes.
And, politics was re-emerging after a long pause. And you had major political factionalism and political conflict with the army trying to, favor first one party, then the other. But basically, between Nawaz Sharif and Benazir Bhutto, there was it consumed a lot of Pakistan's energy managing that internal political issue. Then the situation in Afghanistan, demanded all their attention. Right. Because the Pakistanis felt that once the Soviets withdrew, they had been left holding the Afghanistan baby on their own. Because this was the Pakistani grouse, and it's still heard in Pakistan, that all the, issues which the Americans had swept under the carpet because they needed Pakistan in the anti-Soviet jihad, they suddenly surfaced again, and especially the United States non-proliferation agenda. Next, and I think this point should not be underestimated, the early 90s and the mid 90s, Pakistan saw a great opportunity for itself in South Asia. The mood in 1989, 1990 in Pakistan was one of undisguised triumphalism because they felt that they had defeated a superpower in Afghanistan, in their backyard. And many people in Pakistan felt that that template which had been used against the Soviets in Afghanistan could be employed now against India in Jammu and Kashmir. So, through the 90s, the Kashmir issue really was at the core of India-Pakistan tensions. And the chronology of that period is littered with examples of, enormous spikes in tension and near conflict situations.
I mean, and I think the repercussion of that is still being felt by Pakistan because most of the players they created in that era are now coming back to haunt them in one way or the other, be it the instability in Pakistan itself or the internal security problem. Ambassador, one of the things I would like to know from you, having served there and having worked on it, what is the internal security consensus of Pakistan?
I think the internal security situation is very bad because they don't have a algorithm or a game plan to deal with it. Essentially, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan in total disarray and the coming back of the Taliban to power in Afghanistan was seen, it was never said as such, but it was generally seen as a victory for Pakistan's foreign policy and strategic community. That something which they had taken many risks for a long period of time had finally come to pass. And they would now be able to construct the architecture in Afghanistan, which would be in Pakistan's interest. So the Taliban came to power. And while the Pakistanis expected some difficulties with the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, they never expected difficulties of this magnitude. And they also did not realize how different an animal the Taliban out of power is from the Taliban in power in Afghanistan. And perhaps these were critical errors of judgment of the Pakistan strategic elite, because now they have a situation where the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is aligned and affiliated to the Taliban in Afghanistan, says that just like the Taliban has got the space it merited in Afghanistan, we also should have our merited space in the tribal areas like we used to. And which is why you have a conflict taking place in Pakistan's former tribal areas, and it is spilling over into the rest of Pakistan. And I said the Pakistani authorities don't have a game plan or an algorithm of dealing with this. They can deal with it at a kinetic level, at a tactical level, but how do you address this issue at a policy level is something which they have not been able to come up with a good answer for.
When you say strategic elite, Ambassador Raghavan, do you also mean the incumbent or the next prime minister, perhaps Mr. Sharif, either of them, Nawaz or Shehbaz? Or do you just mean the armed forces and the police?
I think I mean at this stage, the Pakistani system as a whole. I don't think the political class has better answers. One point one must remember that and this is one of the problems of Pakistan having a long history of military rule, is that on security related issues, the political class has very little to say or very little experience of dealing with the issues. Nawaz Sharif, the last time he was in power, had made certain efforts, to try to have a dialogue with the Tehreek-e-Taliban, and when then that didn't work, he gave the military a free hand when they, embarked on Zarb-e-Hazm. But I don't think even he has any great new ideas on how to deal with this situation. Generally, in situations of this kind, politicians are better than security people because the securitized approach will always be tactical and it will never solve the problem. It will, push it. You will just be kicking the can down the road. The political class, usually by attempting to start dialogues, by attempting to address local issues, will try to diffuse the issue. But I'm not sure whether in Pakistan the political class has this kind of experience and also the kind of confidence required to address a serious problem of the kind they face.
In an essay that you wrote about Mr. Singh, the former External Affairs Minister of India, there was a very interesting quote that you attribute to him, that governments have no idea when they intervene, the scope of their intervention has a long-term effect. Do you think that the constant interventions or the tinkerings that the Pakistan policy space has done in its economics, foreign policy, its relations with its neighbors, has now brought it to a state where it is seen as a, for lack of a better word, a pariah state? I refer specifically to Pakistan's relationship with OIC countries, the Organization of Islamic Countries. I refer specifically to Pakistan and Turkey. There is some cold, distant friendship there, but it is both cold and distant at this point of time. And also Afghanistan, because how could Pakistan not read into the Afghani rulers that they were not really going to take Pakistan at face value like they did in the first time round?
But you see, the problem in when you have the military running the show for a long period of time, the distinction between national security and national interest gets blurred. For the Pakistan military, and this perhaps may be true of other militaries also, national interest comprises the whole of, or national security comprises the whole of national interest. That security is everything. Now, when you actually think about it, it's actually not so, because national interest, certainly one very important element is national security, but there are a huge number of other things, which is, your societal harmony, your the strength of your economy, employment, the social indicators of your people, etc., etc. All of that is part of national interest. But if you privilege security excessively, then you end up making wrong choices, and which is what Pakistan did with regard to Afghanistan from the 1980s onwards, because they quite failed to see how the impact of their security interventions in Afghanistan would impact the whole of Pakistan. The blowback of that, how it would undermine everything else happening in Pakistan. It would undermine the economy. It would lead to a growth of sectarian tensions and internal terrorist attacks, which would act as a kind of a dampener for any kind of industrial and economic activity and would lead to a flight of capital. They were just blind to those consequences. And this is the problem about prolonged military rule. Or the problem in securitizing policy in a general sense. And Pakistan is a classic case of policy having been securitized very comprehensively. And if everything then gets directed towards national security, you find that the whole world has moved on while you have remained stuck in the past. And this is exactly what has happened to Pakistan with regard to many of the principal OIC interlocutors, especially Saudi Arabia and UAE, because the nature of the conversation in those countries has changed. They are talking about issues and trying to, fashion a trajectory which is totally different from what Pakistan is doing. So when you have different conversations, different levels of conversation, then you find that you're on the margins. You're no longer in the main discussion frames, and that is, I think, to a large extent, Pakistan's situation today.
This opens up a very interesting question. For me personally, do you think that the creation or the retaining of the Indian civil services and then turning it into the IAS was one of and if I remember correctly, Pakistan does not really have a civil administration system of this sort.
They do. They also had many ICS officers who opted for Pakistan.
Yes.
And then they established a civil service of Pakistan. But
during the Bhutto and the Zia era,
I think the civil service of Pakistan, because of major political interference, it lost its elan, and it lost its the civil service certainly had a less important role in Pakistan than in India.
So this is what I wanted. So do you think that perhaps having a system in place because when one is looking at reports coming out of the Jinnah Institute, every Monday we put out a newsletter, and for that we have to read out a lot. What we find is that there is no dearth of material about Afghanistan. There is no dearth of material about Bangladesh. But the output or scholarly output coming in from institutions in Pakistan has come down to a trickle now. A lot of work is happening from expat Pakistani academicians abroad, but there is nothing coming out from the civilian space of Pakistan. So this narrowing down of the civilian public policy interaction, what would that have led to had it continued? Because I think it was there even while you served as the ambassador, the High Commissioner of India to Pakistan.
You mean there was greater civil space for civil society there?
Yes.
No, I don't think so. I think to some extent, the situation now is better than what it was 20 or 30 years ago, because you have more, scholarly activity, research activity, more academic activity in Pakistan than you did 20, 25 years ago. There are a number of the Pakistan education system, higher education system, for a long time has been in deep crisis. But in the past 10, 15 years, some new private universities have come up, which are pretty high quality, or certainly much better than what there was in Pakistan in the past. Similarly, there are new think tanks, one of which you mentioned, Jinnah Institute. And it is true that many of these think tanks focus much more sharply on foreign policy and security issues than they do on domestic economics and domestic institutions and public policy. But still, I think the situation today is better than what it used to be. It is true that, when you compare with India, Pakistan doesn't come out looking very well. But that is because the Indian experience was very different. You had regular elections. You had a democratic framework. You had, to a considerable extent, a reliance on extra government inputs in public policy, whether it was by way of the Planning Commission or whether it was by other institutions. All of those experiences were much weaker in Pakistan because of the long years of military rule.
Right. So thank you for that information, because I was under the impression that things are getting bad now. So there is some hope in Pakistan. Thank you for that. I will now ask you 2 or 3 questions. This is like a runway, and then I'll open it up because it is Pakistan. I'm sure that a lot of people would have questions about Pakistan. So first, do you see any possibility this election, if it happens on 8th of February, because there is a lot of resistance to the idea, which is building up already, would it change Pakistan in any significant way?
Well, you know, I would say that, as you put it, in case the elections take place, and I think it will be a good thing if there is a regular government rather than a caretaker administration in place. I think it will permit that the government will have a longer term vision, and it'll have to come out with some policy framework to deal with many of the pressing problems they face. So in that sense, I see it as a step forward. But in a more fundamental sense, whether this election is going to throw up something which will lead to radically new options being explored by Pakistan is more difficult to say, because the prognosis for Pakistan is quite grim, because the kind of serious issues they face, and many people ask the question whether the political class over there has the bandwidth to deal with these issues. To my mind, if Nawaz Sharif comes back to power, despite all the negative connotations which are associated with him, for good reason, I think it would be a good thing for Pakistan, because he's experienced he's an experienced politician. He also has a certain tempered approach to major issues, which will be good for Pakistan. But whether it will mean a fundamental change, I don't know. It's very difficult to say. I would say the odds are against that.
Right. One of our previous speakers in this Sensemaker session has been a historian of Pakistan, Ishak Ahmed. And Professor Ahmed is known for his biography of Jinnah, but also he wrote, one of his earlier books was Pakistan, the Garrison State. And when I asked him in an informal setting whether he sees the moving away of the garrison state at any reasonable time, his answer was an unequivocal no. So do you think that the Pakistan and the hold of military and the armed apparatus on Pakistan is at any point of time going to be slightly more relaxed? Do you see any hope in the new Pakistani general?
I don't think change will come about because of individual generals. I think the point is that Pakistan is changing, but it's changing very slowly. The question you asked earlier about the space which civil society has today, the space which civil society has today is much more than what it had some years ago. And it's because of social media, it's because of mainstream media, it's because of the lawyers and the courts. It's also because of a greater extent of politicization. And when you put all of that together, you suddenly find that the Pakistan military has to work extra hard to get the things done which it wants. It's not like in the old days where one phone call would lead to everyone falling in line. It's not working like that. So the Pakistan army is also having to work harder and harder. What this suggests is that you have a situation where perhaps the role of the Pakistan military is not as predominant as it used to be. But as I said, the process is very slow. So while this process may be there as a discernible structural feature, but it will take time before this structural feature expresses itself in a way that you can, for instance, a country like India can make policy on that basis. It's one thing from an analytical point of view to posit that things in Pakistan may be moving in a more positive direction because of civil society becoming more active and seeing the consequences of all the wrong policies in the past. But that doesn't mean that we can suddenly expect that there will be a change on how they deal with different terrorist groups who target India, or it will lead to a change with regard to possible options in Afghanistan and so on. So the process of change is there, but it's a slow process.
So this brings me to the Indian side. I have not really asked any question about the Indian foreign policy. Do you think in the last 5 or 6 years or last 10 years, the Indian foreign policy has been able to isolate Pakistan, put it in a corner, and from there, is it uh, is the Indian foreign policy vis-a-vis Pakistan on a path that could ultimately lead to a positive outcome? And B, do you think that the Indian foreign policy is not as concerned as it is with Pakistan as it used to be 20 or 30 years ago?
It's very clear that, as I said in the beginning, in response to your first question, Pakistan finds that it's out of many of the main conversations in the world today. Its geopolitical relevance has reduced. So to that extent, in the past 8-9 years, it's true that Pakistan is more isolated than it was. Is this a cause of our policies? One can, always, it's good to think so. But in fact, there are other factors which have been at play also. So I think it would be presumptuous to say that it's entirely because of our policies. No, it's not. There are various other factors which had been at play. And it is true that Pakistan is more isolated than it was before. And I think if one factor has to be identified, it would be their prolonged domestic instability and domestic crisis, which has led to this situation. If you're domestically weak and you're unstable, it always leads to your geopolitical isolation and marginalization. Is that a success for Indian foreign policy? It depends on what standards one is setting for Indian foreign policy. If these are tactical standards that we have got the better of Pakistan in one encounter, or we scored a point, then it is, you have one set of standards. The other set of standards is that, how do you try to increase the extent of stabilization in your region? And by that standard, your Pakistan policy has been suboptimal. Yes, it is true that following the ceasefire on the line of control in 2021, the situation was stabilized to some extent. But on the whole, when you have a situation where you do not have high commissioners in place, you have no political or diplomatic dialogue, you do not have any trade at all, people-to-people contacts are at a very low level. It's not a stable situation for two neighboring countries to be in that position. So if your aim is to stabilize relationships in your neighborhood, your results with Pakistan have been less than optimal.
Right. So now it brings me to two of my last sort of questions before I open it up to everybody. And these could be contentious, so you are free to say that you might not want to answer them. One, the idea of Pakistan and the idea that Pakistan was created with was a very clear idea. Would you say that the idea of Pakistan has failed?
Well, it's really not for us to say, because, this is a question which Pakistanis have to answer. Most Indians from 1947 onwards, see Pakistan as an idea, which was in some ways regressive. But that is not a view shared by most Pakistanis. There is always this debate between Indians and Pakistanis. Was partition a tragedy? Most Indians would say it was. Most Pakistanis would say, no, it was not a tragedy, it was a liberation. So whether the idea of Pakistan has failed or not is a question which Pakistanis have to answer. No outsider can answer that question, because the frame of reference is quite different. I mean, for an Indian looking at the situation in Pakistan, the kind of internal security mess there is, dire economic straits, we will say, yeah, it's a failure of the idea of Pakistan. Most Pakistanis would say that this has nothing to do with the idea of Pakistan. This is a failure of policies in a more temporal sense. But the idea of Pakistan is as strong as it always was. And, we should not underestimate the fact that the Pakistanis are as nationalistic and patriotic a people as Indians are.
Right. No, and that is why I said it's a contentious thing. But this is something that some of our guests who have come in from Pakistan have somewhat hinted at. But then that gets me to my last question before I open it up to everybody. There is an idea in the Western analytical tradition of people like Robert Kaplan and others who maintain that Pakistan is a historical anomaly. And at some point of time, it is either going to be gobbled up by Afghanistan or it is going to be gobbled up by India. Do you see that the current problems in Pakistan, the lack of or partly democratic systems, climate change, and others are reinforcing this idea? And with the coming of TTP and other insurgent groups, at some point of time, the Pakistan state might cease to exist?
I don't think so. I know there is this school of thought which feels that the Durand Line and Baluchistan and all of Pakistan's other existential issues and numerous fault lines will lead to some kind of a situation in which Pakistan breaks up. But I don't think so. I think Pakistan faces very serious security, economic and political issues, but it is not on the point of breakup, and it's not on the point of wishing itself away. I think the Pakistan state structures, they have faced intense pressure in the last 2 or 3 years, but there has been no sign at all that those state structures are compromised or that their integrity has been in any way questioned. So, the military, it went through this major civil military strife with Imran Khan, and there was so much talk about how there are great rifts in the military chain of command. In fact, the chain of command maintained itself, and its integrity there's no evidence at all to show that its integrity has been compromised. So I don't think Pakistan is on the point of cracking up or breaking up. I think this is wishful thinking. In India, it often takes the form of wishful thinking on the part of many people, that because of the Durand Line issue, the Afghans will come in from one direction, and Baluchistan will separate and go away, and so on and so forth. I don't see any signs of that at all. I think, to be realistic, over the past 75 years, the Pakistani society has developed a strong sense of itself. And as I said, most Pakistanis, or as many Pakistanis, are strongly nationalistic and patriotic as Indians are. And I don't think we can wish that away and imagine something which does not exist. So I think over the past 75 years, Pakistan it may have begun from very, very shaky foundations. And people are right to say that when it started, it was a country which was insufficiently imagined. But I think over the past 75 years, they have acquired a sense of themselves and a sense of being Pakistani. And that is a major factor in its stability today.
Right. Thank you. Now I'm going to open it up to people who have questions. And because I have plenty of them, but I would not want to take away questions from anybody. So, sir, do you have any questions?
Yeah, well, thank you, TCA. When I spoke to Amog that we should have you over and you very kindly agreed, the one thing I was sure was that we'd get a scintillating talk, and you have not disappointed. So I think all of us in the audience here and subsequently all of us who will hear the tape will go away learning much more than when we started an hour back. So thank you for that. Two questions. One is how strong is the influence of the Wahhabi mullahs, etc., in managing Pakistan or influencing Pakistan today? That's question one. And two, how much is Islamism influencing their policy towards India, and how much vice versa is Hindutva influencing our policy towards Pakistan?
Thank you both. Well, the first question is relatively easy or easier. The influence of the mullahs and the clerics. I think the mullahs and the clerics have a certain street power, and all the political parties and also the Pakistan military use that street power from time to time to put pressure on other stakeholders. But I don't think in the sphere of policy itself, the mullahs have much say. I think the effort of all political parties and the military is to keep the mullahs on their right side, to use them, but otherwise not let them intrude too deeply into the policy space. So I don't think the clerics really have much of a say in the running of Pakistan. But at certain points of time, they become useful instruments for one party to use against the other, or for the military to use against one or the other party, or as a factor in the civil-military tussle. But I don't think Pakistan is, in any senses, a theocratic state where the clerics run the system. No, it's a state which is run by people in politics or people in the military who have certain interests and certain perceptions, and they are guided by those interests and perceptions, not by a religious perspective. How much does the Islamic factor play in Pakistan policy towards India? I think it has a certain underwriting presence. I mean, most Pakistanis are constantly, when they deal with India, are constantly aware of the fact that they are Pakistanis, because many Muslims felt that it was better to have their own political space rather than be part of India. So in that sense, it underwrites all views about all views and all approaches to India. Does that mean that because of that view, most Pakistanis would say that there is never any possibility of having a more normal relationship between India and Pakistan? No, I don't think so. I think most Pakistanis would feel that despite fundamental differences, Indians and Pakistanis can manage to live better than they have in the past. In India, is Hindutva a major factor? You see, if one looks at the present and if one makes an assessment based on the present, one can reach that conclusion. Many Pakistanis would feel that this is the present government in India is driven by majoritarian sentiments and a Hindutva approach, and which is why relations with Pakistan have plummeted so much. But the fact is that we have had a long history of adversarial relations, and you have had very, very bad periods in that relationship when governments of a totally different ideological character were in power in India. So while it may appear so from the present, but in fact, it's not a convincing explanation. The explanations are that you have fundamental unresolved problems in the political space between India and Pakistan. But does the Hindutva factor become a major complicating issue? To some extent, but as I said, I don't think that should be given an exaggerated presence. You have major political differences which explains the poor state of relations. It's not to do with the ideology of the government in power in either country. The same discussions took place 20 years ago when the NDA-1 was in power. And, the general impression was at that time too that with the BJP in power, relations with Pakistan can never improve. And in the beginning, that appeared to be the case, but then things went on a high and then they went on a low, and you had a seesaw of different approaches between India and Pakistan for a long period of time. With this government too, the general impression was that relations between India and Pakistan would deteriorate after the new government was formed in 2014. But on the other hand, you saw some very surprising developments, such as Nawaz Sharif coming to power, coming to the swearing in of Prime Minister Modi visiting Lahore, I'm sorry. But then things didn't work out in the way it was anticipated. So I don't think the ideology of the government, of the party in power, makes that much of a difference. It does make some difference in the margins, but on the whole, it depends on what policies are crafted and with to what extent they are implemented.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have questions lined up, so I'm going to rush through them. So, first question is from my young colleague Bhupesh, and the question is, what are the opportunities of cooperation with other states for Pakistan to achieve economic development?
I'm sorry, what are the
opportunities of cooperation avenues open to Pakistan for achieving economic growth with other states?
Well, you see, if you look at Pakistan's principal neighbors, which is India, Iran, Afghanistan, and finally China, Pakistan has a minimal economic relationship with Iran and India. With Iran, maybe a little bit. With India, nowadays almost zero. With Afghanistan, it is not so much an economic relationship as the fact that Afghanistan is landlocked, therefore it has to source many of its requirements from Pakistan. The substantive economic relationship which Pakistan has with China, and that is a function more of geopolitics than of economics. I think there are substantial opportunities for Pakistan to ratchet up its regional economic profile, but that can only happen once its domestic economy is put on a more sustainable track. And right now, it is not on a sustainable track, primarily because domestic investment in Pakistan is very, very low. Pakistani businessmen do not have the confidence to invest in Pakistan, and they would rather use that money and send it out of the country and invest somewhere else. So in that kind of a situation, regional economic cooperation becomes very problematic. And that is precisely the situation which Pakistan faces today.
Thank you for that, sir. We have next question from my colleague Farheen. And the question is, could you speak about how logical reason and emotions influence major decisions in international relations?
I'm sorry, there was a break. Could you repeat
Sorry.
that?
Yeah. Could you speak to how logical reason and emotions influence major decisions in international relations?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, if one looks at, let's say, one particular approach to foreign policy which was developed in the 1970s, which was of US developing a relationship with China and then building up that relationship to make it a kind of concert against the Soviet Union. Now, it was something which Henry Kissinger had thought of and many Americans had worked at. So it was something which was logically crafted and to some extent very successfully implemented because it played according to the script that had been written for it or planned for it. So you can say that it was a logically planned decision which played a major role in international affairs. But the point is that no matter how logically planned, every decision can have unforeseen consequences or consequences which were not anticipated at all. So today you have a situation where Americans are saying that that policy which was crafted in the late 1960s and 70s of binding China to it and crafting an alliance against the Soviet Union has backfired because China has emerged as a major security and economic competitor of the United States. So you see, the point is that foreign policy, like domestic policy, is not an abstract issue. You're dealing with the real world. And when you're dealing with the real world, you can try to do things so that they perform in the way you want. But you also have to be always on your guard that whatever you do will have consequences which you do not expect because you are dealing with real situations and not abstract issues.
Right. Thank you.
I hope that's a satisfactory answer, but I must think about that more.
I think we should have you here for another sense maker where you only answer this question at some length.
Ask him to speak on Rahim Khana Khana. And the
Yes,
time.
that is a great book, Attendant Lords. That could be our sense maker. So we have another question from my colleague Orko, who looks at Bangladesh. And how do you think the recent election results of Bangladesh are on 7th? They will affect the relations with Pakistan moving forward?
Well, when one looks at Bangladesh and Pakistan, in the same frame, what is surprising is the convergence in the two countries in the 2018 and 2000 and the recent elections in both countries. There's a striking similarity because in the Bangladesh election too, the point has been made that a large part of the political spectrum was not permitted to participate in the elections. And there is a question mark about whether the election was free and fair, very much as there will be a question mark over the Pakistani election. So despite the other divergences which have taken place between Bangladesh and Pakistan, particularly because the Bangladesh economy has performed so well and because their social policies have been that much more successful, this is certainly one convergence between the two. I think in Pakistan, policy in Pakistan about Bangladesh is very, very difficult and very, very contentious because there has so much history associated and there is a sense of trauma which is still not totally present, totally absent. Most Pakistanis have come to terms with the fact that, yes, we were one country, but we separated. But there is a significant number which is reminded of that trauma every time they deal with Bangladesh. There's not much love lost between Pakistan and Sheikh Hasina because of who she is and what she represents in Bangladesh politics and what the Awami League stood for and the forthright positions she took against people who were responsible for the genocide in 1970-71. So because of that, they have numerous reservations about her. I think most Pakistanis may not say so, but I think in their heart of hearts, they would be very happy if she was not in power and someone else was. Because they also see Bangladesh to some extent as a divided polity, and that there is a significant section of opinion in Bangladesh which is anti-Indian, and they feel that that is a constituency with which Pakistan should build bridges.
Right. We have a question from a member of our board, Ms. Vasudevan, and the question is, what conditions do we need to have to establish peace with Pakistan?
Well, it's a very difficult question, you see, because most people, when they ask about India and Pakistan, they say that, things will never improve because, the way both countries view their histories and because of so many issues such as Kashmir, nothing is really ever going to change. It is true that India's relations with Pakistan are notoriously bad. But in fact, if you look at each of our relationships with our neighbors, you will find, and you plot all of them on a graph. You plot India and Pakistan, and you plot India and Nepal, and India and Sri Lanka, and India and Bangladesh, and perhaps even India and Maldives. You will find that the graphs look remarkably similar. So while with Pakistan, there are more serious issues because it has nuclear weapons, you face so many terrorist threats, but the ups and downs in the relationship are very similar to that between India and Nepal or India and Bangladesh, India and Sri Lanka, etc., etc. This is a general pattern in your neighborhood relationships, that things will never be stable. There will always be issues which will come up and that they have to be handled and managed. And India-Pakistan relations are no different. So I don't think there will ever be a situation where India and Pakistan relations will be totally normal and there will be total peace and for all times to come. No, it won't happen. It doesn't happen with Nepal, it doesn't happen with Sri Lanka, and there's no reason why it will happen with Nepal. So relations with neighbors are always dynamic. What can happen if the right policies are pursued and if we are lucky is that you may have a greater element of stability in relations with Pakistan. You may have more features of normalcy. You may have some amount of trade. You may have some amount of people-to-people contact. You may have diplomatic relations. You may have a political relationship, which is not to say it will be tension-free or problem-free. No, but it will have more elements of normalcy and stability. And that is what one can try to achieve. Is that possible? It is possible, but it's never not going to be easy. One final point, I think, when we look at Pakistan-India relations, we should never forget that we are the larger power, we are the larger country, we are the most stable power. So a great part of the onus will be on us, that what do we want to do? So the question is not often what will Pakistan want to do with India, but no, the question is what do we have in mind and how are we going to craft our policies with regard to Pakistan? Because I think the major initiatives will always have to come from us. That is really one very significant factor which the history of India-Pakistan relations throws up, that the initiatives always have to come from India because we are the larger country.
Right. On that note, before we end, one final question from my side. Do you think there is any fear in this coming few years of the Pakistani nuclear arsenal finding its way to nefarious non-state actors?
Well, it's a fear which is always there, but there is no evidence for it. No evidence to suggest that that the nuclear, the security around Pakistan's nuclear assets is compromised in any way, because I think the Pakistan army is quite clear that these are the crown jewels and that they have to protect them, as much as is feasible and is possible. So the fear is always there, and it's often articulated in different circles as not as a groundless fear. And sometimes it's good to have fears without basis. It's good to have a general. It keeps you alert, but one shouldn't make a fear into something which is a likelihood, because then you go down the path of self-fulfilling prophecy. So it appears to me to be a fear which many countries have, but on the whole, it's not a fear with much foundation.
Right. And I hope that that's the way it stays, a fear without any basis. Thank you so much for doing it, sir, on a Friday evening on perhaps the coldest day of the year. And before we end, any last words from our chair?
No, thank you very much, TCA. Thank you very much. I'm deeply obliged.
Thank you, sir, for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your extensive knowledge with us. Thank you, board members and colleagues, for the insightful discussion. Thank you.